Trail and ultra runners, what is going on? What's happening? Welcome to another episode of the Koopcast. As always, I'm your humble host, Coach Jason Koop, and on this episode of the podcast, it is all about something that we as runners are really horrible at. It's all about injury prevention and treatment. Let's face it, we're terrible at preventing injuries. Everybody knows a runner that has been injured. Few of us know runners that have not been injured. And the ones that haven't been injured, I actually think that you guys and gals are lying. So to cut through all that clutter today and to provide some light on the subject, I brought in Dr. Emily Kraus, who specializes in physical medicine and rehabilitation sports medicine at the Stanford Children's Orthopedic and Sports Medicine Center. Emily is a fantastic athlete in her own right, having completed, that's what I wanted to say, 9 marathons, including the Boston Marathon, as well as an ultra runner. But more important to this discussion is she's also performing a lot of research on ultra runners themselves through the Western States 100 and through other means. She is an absolute wealth of information. I have sent my runners to her, and I just cannot say enough about what she is able to do for the community and how she is able to help runners. So I'm going to get right out of the way. Here's my conversation with Dr. Emily Kraus. Emily, we were talking off air. I still can't believe that we have been literally running around in the same circles and not have had any sort of interaction. I mean, you have treated some of my athletes and you've been a part of their injury recovery process. We've literally been at the same place at the same time for a lot of these things. And in addition to that, I've used, and our coaches have used your work in a variety of different fashions. I'm going to take a note right here to cut that out. 154. So I'm excited to bring you on the podcast, Emily. Are you back with me? I guess no. Let's see here. We're recording on my side.
Now I can hear you.
Okay.
And maybe, I don't know if I should log back in. I mean, is it my end as far as the...
No, it's like I said, we've kind of had issues with the connectivity of this the last couple of days. The main thing is that the audio gets recorded, which it always is.
Yeah.
So
but
if you
I
have
hear your questions.
Yeah, I know. So I'll just repeat them. I mean, I'll just
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
just kind of start the whole thing over again. But it, like I said, is when we were talking offline, it's really interesting that we've actually never come into face-to-face, or in this case, in the COVID era, virtual communication, even though we've literally been running around in circles together, as well as you have treated a number of my athletes when they've gotten injured. So that's going to be a topic today. We're going to talk about injury. And I always feel that this is an area within coaching, within athletics, and in particular within the endurance realm, that we absolutely suck at. Coaching is an interdisciplinary profession, and I feel like we have a pretty good fix on how to improve athletes. We know what the dose-response relationship is to different types of workouts and how much mileage, athletes need to improve and things like that. But this injury thing, in endurance sports in particular, I have no other way to describe it, that we absolutely fail at this. Not that we're not trying, but we absolutely fail at this every single year. Every single time there's a study that comes out that tells us what the injury prevalence rate is amongst endurance athletes. I look at it and I go, okay, well, let's just say it's half, right? It depends on what study you're looking at. Let's just say it's half. The other half are lying. I mean, that's the only way that I can encapsulate those studies. So to start out with, Emily, why is this the case? Why are we so bad at this?
Oh, I mean, don't be so hard on yourself, Jason.
I feel like I'm throwing people like you under the bus because you're like primarily involved in keeping athletes healthy, but it's like we're trying, but we're just not very, I can't, it's like the weathermen, right? When the weathermen are off, when their forecast is off 70% of the time, and I live in Colorado Springs, and the weather forecasting there is notoriously horrible. I look at that as the failure of the profession. The professionals can't get enough, of a fix on the situation to give us a good weather prediction. This
Yeah.
injury thing is the same thing because the prevalency rates are so high.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. There's nothing that we can change about that. Running is an injurious sport. And I feel most coaches, their goal is not to injure their athletes. I think all coaches, that's their goal. But I think there is that fine line between getting an athlete to the start line as healthy as possible, but also performing at his or her best. And that's the kind of challenging crux of the coach is where does that line go? And each athlete is individual. And that's, I mean, as much as I appreciate you trying to make the effort to understand the why of these injuries, I think it's so complicated. And that's why there's still new research that's getting churned out on the regular. And I think we as physicians are continually humbled, especially in the sport of ultra marathons and ultra running, that we still have so much to learn and understand about that particular sport as to the why and what can we do to reduce overall injury risk as best as possible. I think it's hard to prevent. Just like you said, I think the prevalence rates are so high that it's probably going to happen at some point. But I think the question is, how bad is it? And how soon can that athlete return to their activity without really taking too much time off? And I think it depends on the type of injury and some of these other predisposing risk factors and other kind of actions and behaviors that maybe aren't as directly related to the training as far as the workout and the long run and what maybe the coach is prescribing or coach is writing up as far as their training program. So it's complicated, but that's why we're having this conversation to
To-
at least understand what we know.
totally. And I started actually tracking this with my athletes in the mid 2000s, probably 2005, 2006, because I wanted to understand, was I doing better than the average? Like I wanted to use it as a little bit of a, hey, Koop, are you doing a good job with this? And so ever since 2005, 2006, I've tracked the injury rates with my athletes on an annual basis. How many athletes did I have during the year? And then how many of them got injured? And I'm proud to say that I beat the averages year after year after year, but they're still horrible. Like they're still not very good. So we're going to try to get on a pathway to getting better because there's everybody listening to this podcast is an ultra runner and every one of them without fail has been injured. And if you haven't, call me because I want to know your secret sauce or you're lying. So let's start on the prevention side of things. We're going to move through this chronologically. We're going to move from prevention to sort of injured, this weird transition phase, to actually injured, and then the rehab part. What does the research tell us, and what do we know about the things that can actually be preventative for injury in an endurance? We're going to consider this as an endurance running setting.
Mm-hmm. So I think the first question is, what injury are we talking about? Are we talking about like a tendinopathy, or are we talking about a bone stress injury or stress fracture, stress reaction? Are we talking about a blister? I mean, all of those are going to take very different strategies. And I have a feeling we're thinking more of like the kind of musculoskeletal, probably more so bone, because those are the ones that the athletes are and the runners are most afraid to get as part of their training because of the concern for the amount of time that they're out. And the challenge is there's a lot of factors that go into play with an athlete as far as where are they at in their training cycle, what's their baseline mileage, how long have they been running, what's their underlying risk kind of profile look like. And we're a lot of the work that I've been doing in the kind of ultra marathon world specifically is trying to understand specific risk factors for bone health and kind of get a better handle on that and how that's different from a collegiate runner and adolescent runner. Are they the same? My hunch is no. Just because to get to that ultra marathon or ultra running state, you kind of need to get past some of these other milestones and these other points to get to almost that more resilient kind of stage of training. So kind of looking at kind of underlying risk factors such as nutrition. I think that's a personal interest and kind of area of research and clinical interest of mine is an athlete really kind of just fueling properly. And we look at things like low energy availability and how that can relate to overall injury risk, specifically bone health, and kind of long-term or chronic low energy availability can really lead to disruptions in the hormonal profile of an athlete and can really suppress the release of certain hormones that are important for overall bone health as well as reproductive function. And we're seeing that both in males and females. And I can get into more of the definitions if you'd like me to, but I just kind of to give the broad picture right now as far as just overall risk factors. When I think about low energy availability, we're talking about either overtraining, underfueling, so not getting enough caloric intake per day or over a period of days. And then kind of usually it's a combination of both of those things. And I think it's challenging for an endurance athlete, especially because of that difficulty trying to maintain calories during heavy training bouts and training cycles. Trying to figure out what their fueling needs are when they're doing these big adventure days, especially when we're thinking at altitude, understanding how that's going to affect their metabolism, training just overall just gut health and how their body is going to be able to digest and absorb those calories. So all those factors go into play, and especially during a heavier training load, you need to be able to dial that in to avoid that low energy availability over a long period of time, because that over time is going to impair the bone health, which then leads to that increased risk of that stress fracture, which we can get into more details of the science if you'd like. So there's that whole piece as far as the nutrition kind of contributing to bone health. And then there's a whole piece of genetic risk. So what is just an athlete's overall genetic risk profile? Do they have an underlying or family history of osteoporosis? Do they have other, maybe even lesser obvious risk factors? And that's one of the topics that we're exploring in with some of our Western states research, which I'd love to share a little bit more about, is how does that genetic risk profile play into an athlete's overall risk? And should they eventually adjust their training, or not eventually, but now adjust their training to make sure that they mitigate that risk and kind of take that into account with the whole big picture? So that's something that an athlete should understand. Maybe that's something that's the conversation that they should have with their coaches. Like, hey, I've got an extensive family history of low bone mineral density in my family. Maybe we should adjust kind of just overall load, and we need to be even more conservative, increasing training volume from week to week, or just kind of mixing it up. So there's that whole piece. And then I think thinking about kind of overall bone strength and the value of kind of strength training to overall build bone mineral density. And I think that's a hot topic in all of endurance running. Like, what is the optimal? I think finally we're getting to this point that strength training is valuable for just both performance and injury risk reduction. I think the research on performance is probably a little bit more robust than the injury risk reduction, but anecdotally, I prescribe strength training or recommend strength training, not just for an injured athlete, but for an uninjured athlete to keep them from injury. And I think that dosage and kind of prescribing that strength training is very different based on where that athlete's coming from, whether they're in the mid-season or whether they're in preseason. and how open they are to strength training. If they're going to be like, I personally, like my own, as a runner, I have a hard time going to the gym and lifting weights. So you almost need to like find a way to sneak it into the training program, or you
Subversively.
need to like make somebody come with me, and like I need a training buddy who will hold me accountable for that couple of days a week, or else I'm probably, if something's going to give, it's going to be the strength training, because it's just less for me. I just get less joy and excitement from lifting weights than other people. So that's the thing that's going to give. But I think that there is some value, and there is a lot of great research about resistance exercise building overall bone mineral density, and not just in this kind of osteoporotic kind of perimenopausal female, or we kind of think of that very fragile profile. I think there's a lot of value even in a young athlete. And I'm all about longevity, kind of starting. I mean, we have young athletes doing ultras, which is probably another podcast. But I think it should really start early, ideally, to kind of get into a good habit and to reap the most benefits. So I think those are kind of the big buckets. And then just overall, like micronutrients, making sure you're getting a well-rounded diet, getting that calcium, getting that vitamin D. I think there's some probably unexplored research and just overall the influence of iron and the fluctuations of iron and iron deficiency during different bouts of training, especially in the running world, which I can kind of get into a little bit, but it gets really kind of into the weeds as far as more in that physiology piece. So I think an athlete needs to think about all of those pieces. And then beyond that, just sleep, stress level, those are also, I think, an athlete forgets sometimes that like the stress of maybe a new job, maybe a pandemic, maybe like some challenges in a relationship, that's going to influence overall just kind of baseline stress level. And for me, stress is stress, whether it's stress from a workout or stress from a crazy day at work. That needs to be factored in. And something I've learned as an athlete is to communicate those, like all the stresses. Sometimes I know coach doesn't want to be your therapist, but being able to be like, hey, this has been a hell of a week and I am feeling pretty overwhelmed with work, and having that coach be able to be like, all right, we need to like dial back and maybe eliminate that workout or adjust it, just the timing of it, to integrate it into the training program. And those little things kind of, I think, can help mitigate and kind of keep that training steady and reduce that risk. So, I mean, for me, it's a holistic approach, kind of factoring in each of these risk factors and possible causes and contributors. And it's different for each athlete as far as, is this a weekend warrior or is this a kind of dialed, I'm going for kind of the big races and I'm in that elite kind of pro category. And I think there's a lot of overlap in that conversation, but I think the focus and emphasis is a little different too. And I think all of it's important.
So I think you just gave me like 7 podcast ideas, Emily. Thank you very much. It's a lot of workload on my plate now. It actually makes it a little bit easier because sometimes content is hard to continue to churn out. But the thing that the listeners can learn the most from that entire monologue from is that injuries are multifactorial. There's very rarely, unless you fall and you break your collarbone or some sort of impact injury, they are very rarely caused by one singular thing. Yes, there are heavier hitters than others, and that's what we try to filter through when we're working with athletes. Yes, it might be more of this and less of that, but there's always a constellation of things going on. The other thing that really struck me as you were speaking is I was reminded that our theory on why injuries start to crop up has kind of gone in waves over the years. When I first started coaching, it was all about biomechanics. Biomechanics are the sole cause of injuries, and then it moved to footwear. Everybody went, minimalist shoes, and then they swung over to the maximalist side. Mm-hmm. And now the theme, and I don't know whether this is probably a little bit of additive, there's some Venn diagram overlap, but now there seems to be much more focus on the entire stress load picture. and recovery picture, as well as nutrition, which you just mentioned. And I've always found that an interesting facet because, like, as coaches, we've jumped on that. Like, I've jumped on the biomechanics bandwagon, and wrongfully so. Yes, there are biomechanical factors at play, but it's not like everybody has to have perfect form. Obviously, because everybody would not be injured, right? We would have solved that problem a long time ago, right, Em?
Right. And it's funny. So part of my work, I work at a motion analysis sports performance lab. I'm the medical director. I'm not a biomechanist. I do not spend hours nerding out on, is it rear foot strike versus mid foot strike, and what force vectors are at play. But I do enjoy having that conversation and kind of learning from experts. And we chatted earlier. We were part of some happy hour led by a biomechanist with probably 20 or 30 biomechanics nerds all on a Zoom call debating about some of these topics. And I think that the big question is, when I have a runner, usually they're young runners running on a treadmill, we're looking at, we're doing like 3D motion capture, looking at their kinetics, looking at their kinematics. And sure, everybody's going to have some nuanced differences with their form. And I'm not I don't break them down and say, hey, your ankle's off by 2 degrees. You're at risk for knee pain for the rest of your life. You just hang up the shoes now. You just better retire. This is bad news. I mean, for me, it's like there's all these margins of error kind of within our body, and I mean, our bodies are resilient to some degree. But for me, it's like, okay, let's get them kind of more balanced, stronger, and we'll get them into a good rehab program. But for me, it's having some of those other discussions as far as expectations and, hey, this isn't the end all be all. Like, you need to be thinking about your nutrition. You need to be thinking about kind of periodization throughout the year. That's a big issue in California too, as far as I call it COTS, California Overtraining Syndrome.
I'm going to quote you on that. That's really good.
It happens, and it sneaks up on people too. They realize, I've been running 6 days a week all year round. And for me, I get concerned about just load in those discussions. But there are also these other smaller things that aren't as transparent, and you can't see on their training log that are big contributors, or can be big contributors, that sometimes an athlete forgets to disclose. Like, oh, I changed my diet, I went vegan, or I'm trying out this other new diet, or I was trying to lose a few pounds and decided to just not fuel as well during my training, or not maybe eat as much for my recovery because my appetite's already suppressed. And that's over time can be really problematic for just overall injury risk and even just performance too.
Right. Okay, so we have this multifactorial picture of which we haven't gotten any good answers. And not to be a spoiler, we're not going to have any lightning bolt answers by the end of this podcast.
Right.
I think that both you and I can agree on that. But we have this multifactorial picture, and runners they're kind of like nodding their heads and rolling their eyes at the same time. Yeah, I need to rest. Yeah, I need to eat enough. Yeah, I need to control my training load. Yeah, I need to make sure that, I'm doing this, that, and the other. But inevitably, every runner will come to this one critical point where they think that they think that they're going to have an injury, or they get a niggle, is usually the vocabulary that I hear a lot. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to decide whether to train or whether to back off, and then how to treat it at the same time. This, I think, is like the ultimate mystery. Because these are the people that go into physical therapy clinics. They're like, hey, can you, help me fix this? And the physical therapist sizes them up and, gives them some modalities or tools, neuromuscular retraining and things like that. But athletes trying to make this decision process by themselves, if they don't have a coach, if they don't have a network around them, really get confounded by this because they don't know whether to back off or whether to keep going forward. So what I want to do next is let's kind of like educate the listeners with what is going on underneath the hood from a physiological standpoint. Let's talk about a musculoskeletal type of injury. Mm-hmm. What's going on underneath the hood, and how can they go through that decision-making process of what to do next if these injuries start to creep up and they're trying to decide how to manage them?
Oh, the niggle. It's so funny. I think that the first time
How
I
else would you
used
describe it?
the first time I feel like I use that every now and then kind of clinically, or I try to talk to other physicians about the niggle, and they're like, "What did you just say?"
What I know, right? You'd never pass muster in like a clinical standpoint, but it's used so, and I am
Well,
a
yeah.
vocabulary stickler. Ask my coaches. I get on them whenever they screw up vocabulary, and I hammer myself whenever I get vocabulary wrong, or I just make shit up because I can't describe it.
Mm-hmm.
This is one that I just let fly because I don't have better language to describe it. So if anybody has better language, please let me know what it is.
Yeah. And I think it kind of captures this. A niggle can be just a little tweak, some residual soreness from the day before. I slept wrong, it's got a little niggle, but it also can be a very early kind of the red light, the check engine sign is starting to flash, and it's so early, and it's so hard to interpret or distinguish, is this a nothing, or is this a something that really requires a change in action? I think that's hard for an athlete, and especially an athlete who maybe has a history of an injury. I think it can drive them crazy. And I've seen it on both ends, where it's like, oh yeah, I had this shin pain, but I thought it was a nothing, and so I just finished my 20 miler on it, and it got really bad at the end, and then I'm limping and hobbling off the home. And there are those moments where, first of all, I think if the niggle continues to increase during a training, like during a workout, or if it lingers post workout, and by the end of the day really is almost like you don't want to get up, you don't want to walk, because of how much it's really started to almost get inflamed. And I think that's a great time to say, okay, let's take a day or two off, kind of assess and decide whether this needs to be explored with a kind of a medical, or kind of with a sports medicine team, or maybe it will resolve. And I think the challenge is, kind of distinguishing between bone and non-bone, or kind of bone and kind of soft tissue. The management is very different.
Right.
And I think it's really hard for an athlete to distinguish, is this hip pain that I'm feeling at the front of my hip? And most of the time, that first theory is, oh, it's my hip flexor. It's just I just tweaked my hip flexor.
Right.
I ran up this hill, or like I was running down a really steep section, and I think I just kind of overdid it, or really kind of tweaked my hip flexor. That's fine, but if it's really kind of tendon hip flexor, there may be some tightness, but there shouldn't be kind of that impact type pain every step, and that kind of deeper, and sometimes it's even more deep and kind of harder to describe. And that's where a lot of the bone injuries, especially around the pelvis, I start to hear that description. There's this vague, almost sometimes migrating.
Yeah.
And whether it's kind of stemming from like the deep, like femur, the femoral neck, also the sacrum's really hard, because that's this, like, it's my SI joint. So I think sometimes these athletes get into injury denial a little bit and start to chalk it up to maybe something that they were told previously when they did have that diagnosis. And they're like, oh, it's just my SI joint again. I just need to do this little stretch, or this little kind of hop, skip, and a dance, and then I can go back to my training. And I think what needs to happen, and what should happen, is I think body awareness is important. I think understanding when an athlete may be kind of catastrophizing based on a prior history is important, to just be aware and have kind of a frank conversation of, like, are you really having severe pain, or are you scared because you were so set back by this prior injury? And part of it's valid, because a big risk factor for future injury is history of injury, or history of that injury, and especially with bone stress injury. But I think kind of getting into a bit more of a conversation, and for me, 1 or 2 days of modified activity to kind of further explore for an athlete, and kind of adjusting training, not to the point of sabotaging their training block, but really maybe saving them is better. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Is better than trying to push through. I'm not the coach. Another disclosure, I'm not a coach, and I'm definitely more conservative. And I'm sure sometimes coaches get frustrated because I'm like, hey, let's dial back or just kind of take that on the bike. I mean, or take that to a different mode of activity if they're trying to maintain some aerobic capacity or trying to make sure they don't lose fitness. I think that the neurotic side of the athlete really starts to take over. And I think for me, it's almost better for an athlete to relax, realize that, if you meet with the right person, you can try to distinguish whether this is a couple of days, maybe a week of adjustment. And really, especially with early bone stress injuries or early stress reactions, if you catch them early enough and you kind of curb the training or adjust the training enough, oftentimes you can get redirected. An example, because I think sometimes examples are nice. I had an athlete who had kind of vague thigh pain, and she had a history of bone stress injuries, but nothing so intense or so severe or kind of higher risk. But she also has a lot of athletes. She's an elite athlete and knows bone and knows she doesn't want to mess with bone. But it was like mid thigh, and there's a certain maneuver is like getting out of a car where she was really kind of loading the and that really triggered her pain. And she's like, something's not right. She tried to do a workout on the track. She declined and really just dropped off towards the end of the workout. Ended up getting, kind of had the hunch, got the MRI, had a low grade stress reaction, low grade bone stress injury of the femoral shaft. She was able, I worked really closely with her physical therapist, talked about kind of load management and what the next 4 weeks would look like. As soon as we felt it was safe, we got her on the bike, doing workouts on the bike. I think people forget how awful a bike workout can be. It's almost more
100%.
torturous than a lot of running workouts. And she was able to get back in like a 4 to 6 week time frame. And I don't want to give that as an example that, oh, okay, all I hear was 4 to 6 weeks. That's what I'm taking away from this.
Right.
No, we caught it early enough, and we were able to really get that athlete back safely to that elite level. And she probably wasn't doing higher level workouts for a little bit longer. But, femoral shaft stress reaction is way different than a fracture. Like if you and you train and you get to the point where that literally breaking point, you're either out for the season or you got a rod in your femur. And those are the things that the athlete needs to listen to, is that, we got to adjust the bone remodeling during that time. And sometimes it's just taking the dial back that's enough to allow that remodeling and kind of that reset to happen.
You asked me this and I'll answer it. The way that I look at this through a coach is through a directional lens, because I realize that athletes are always going to have pains and things like that just through the course of training. It's a hard freaking sport, running and trail running and ultra running. It's a hard freaking sport. You're intentionally damaging your body in order to get better. That's the fundamental proposition with physical and endurance training. But I use a directional arrow. Is I see a trend line that's getting worse, that's when I'll start to put in advanced interventions. Go see your physical therapist. We're going to, back off the training load. We're going to do X, Y, or Z, whatever the thing warrants. If the trend line is the same or it's getting better, then I realize that painful sensations, I was choosing my words very carefully there, that painful sensations are part of the occupation. It's part of the gig. It's part of the game. You're not going to be able to avoid those all the time. And then sometimes it's what you want in order to overload the body. So I've always used that kind of rule, that directional rule of thumb, where if I see things trending in the wrong way for 2 or 3 days, that's my litmus test. Not one day that where the pains, just a little bit, 2 or 3 days where it's gradually getting worse, because I've always gone back to this fundamental proposition that we're predominantly dealing with overuse injuries. And I'm emphasizing that intentionally. They don't happen because typically don't happen because I took a wrong step over here or I did this hill workout or whatever. That is just the end point. In reality, that overuse injury has been brewing for weeks or sometimes months. And if you have a good dialogue, and if an athlete has good body awareness, to use your vocabulary, if they have good body awareness, they likely have noticed that or should have noticed that weeks ago and didn't pay attention to those directional arrows. That's fundamentally, that's the way I've always tried to manage it. I don't play physical therapist and okay, go, do e-stim or contrast baths or anything like that. I call in the experts when it's time for that. But as somebody who monitors training on a day-to-day basis, that's kind of my fundamental role as a coach. I've just found that directional arrow you get more good answers out of that, and you don't have to curtail the training unnecessarily. The linchpin in all of that is the athlete has to constantly be updating the subjective feedback within their training log because it's so important.
Sounds like that was like a nice plug for your athlete.
God, no. It's taken me a while to do that, but like I said, I still think I suck at it. I think everybody sucks at it. It's hard. I mean, it is hard, this transition between not being injured and having something to deal with, something that you're aware of, and getting injured. If we had a perfect crystal ball, we'd never even get to the first step, right? But the reality is that we don't. A lot of what you've been doing recently is research to try to illuminate what is going on underneath the hood, specifically within an ultra running population. And so I want to give you a little bit of the floor. This podcast is going to come out before Western States, so hopefully you can recruit the entire 400 some odd person field into this study. Do you guys, let me pause for a second, get on soapbox for just a minute or so here. The Western States Endurance Run does a phenomenal job of supporting research. And I had to look this up the other day because I'm in the middle of writing the second edition of the book, and that's not a shameless plug. It's just background story. When I first started coaching, the year that I first started coaching ultra runners, throughout that entire year, exactly 6 papers were published that had some version of ultra running in the title. I had to go back, do a retroactive PubMed search to find this. Ultra running, ultramarathon, whatever it was. Exactly 6 during the year. That's not a lot. Now, there's research that existed before that, but 15 years ago, it was really skinny. And it was very, very hard to drive research and science-based practice when none actually exists. Western States has been at the forefront of changing that. They're not the only player. There's a lot of other players in there, but they actively support it to the nth degree. They pull money out of their budget to support it. I just think it's awesome. Emily, you're involved in that, so thank you. Anybody who gets the opportunity to participate in one of these research projects that's done through a race, through their local university, do it. Take advantage of it. It helps everybody. It feels good to do afterwards. Maybe the study is a little invasive and it doesn't feel good during, but afterwards, when you look back on the experience, you'll actually feel that you've contributed to something. And we're at the stage where all these contributions are incredibly important, and they add just a tremendous amount to our knowledge to it. That's my soapbox. Go and join Emily's study. So what's going to come on tap? What have you been doing with Western States, and what's going to kind of come next?
Jason, thank you for that plug. We'll be sending out a recruitment email probably early May, and that's really helpful. And I think so important too, to just get a diverse population, and just any information is going to contribute to the science and the understanding of ultra running. But so this is our third year. We've been lucky to be able to conduct research at Western States in 2018 and 2019. And it's really been a continuation of this idea and this hypothesis. So you'll see, or you'll notice that we don't have a lot of publications out yet, because we're a little underpowered, or we don't have enough athletes to really make broad conclusions.
It's hard.
So
it's hard.
I'm trying to put that little asterisk, hey, we're still, some of the stuff that I'll talk about, we still need a bit more information to make sure that it holds up. But Our studies, so our primary analysis, we're trying to look at different risk factors, and I'll kind of get into some definitions with female and male athlete triad. So those triad risk factors in ultramarathon runners and how it really relates to bone health. And we're also looking at specifically that association with stress fracture risk, bone mineral density risk, and the relationship with different genetic risk scores. And so that's all kind of things that we can get at the race site or at SQA the days before.
We got to call it Olympic Valley now. Somebody's going to come up after us after this podcast is over, since they officially changed the name to Olympic Valley.
Thank you. Olympic Valley. Okay.
I'm helping you out on that one, Emily. You know what's going to come down the pipeline if we let that stand.
Yes. I appreciate that correction. Olympic Valley. And we're going to be on site. So we have funding. We've secured funding from Western States Research Foundation. It's been wonderful working with them. They've been super supportive. Each year they review different research proposals. So they don't play favorites. We pitch our proposal and kind of what our funding needs are each year. And this year, actually last year, we got funded and just because the race was postponed or canceled, we were able to push it to 2021. And so we have partnerships with Inside Tracker. We actually get blood draws, fasting blood draws. Shockingly enough, we get runners to get usually early in the morning. They'll come over and get lab draws at a site on really near actually registration. And then we also get bone mineral density testing through DEXA scans, type of kind of the method, I guess the gold standard. I'm using air quotes right now to measure bone health. There are limitations with DEXA scanning, but it's kind of our own kind of the only true measure that's easily accessible through the clinical setting. So we use that to just get a better understanding of an athlete's bone mineral density. And then we also give each athlete an extensive pre-race questionnaire that they fill out online and try to get more information about kind of where they are as a runner, like what's their training level, how competitive do they interpret their training to be, what is their kind of injury history. We don't follow these athletes in the future, so prospectively, but we do try to get as much information as prior injuries, including bone injuries, genetic history, as far as kind of any family history. And then we also ask about, for females, menstrual history, and in males, we do ask some other kind of sex-related questions about kind of libido and morning erections, which can be influenced by hormonal suppression through the low energy availability, kind of going back to that piece. And then we gather all that information, and we also look at their kind of finishing, like how many of those athletes who got all that information actually finished the race. We do a little bit with performance, but really it's more just trying to get this risk profile. So I want to kind of share some of the information. We've submitted a manuscript. It's under review. Hopefully we submitted our revisions within the last month, so hopefully it gets accepted. It was submitted to a journal, and a reputable journal, and it would be great to be able to get that out hopefully before the race. But some of the findings were one, and I just don't want to misquote myself, so let me.
I love the fact that you have to look up your own quote in the research paper to get it right. I get paranoid when I'm quoting other people, but the fact that it's you, that makes me feel a lot better.
Well, lots of statistics and numbers, and I'm really hard. I mean, it's hard for me to keep those numbers in my head, but 37.5% of women reported a history of bone stress injury. That's higher than some of the other prevalent studies that are out there on ultramarathon runners. I think those are around like 20%, 21% in females. So higher bone stress injury or stress fracture rate. And then in males, it was about 20.5%.
Yeah, the dudes are lying. I don't buy that for a second. The guys are lying. There's no way that's only 25%.
Yeah. And then the overall bone mineral density, it was interesting. Males had a greater percentage of lower bone mineral density Z-scores. So that's how we score. We look at the lumbar spine. That's kind of our best indicator of kind of bone health. It has kind of a mix of trabecular and cortical bone, or different types of bone. And the 30% of men had bone mineral density Z-scores of less than -1, so the other challenge with bone density and measuring bone mineral density with these DEXA scans is the scoring system is based on healthy age-matched controls. So people out in the community that may not be engaging in weight-bearing sport. So you would think that a runner, especially an ultra runner who is putting a lot of load into their bone every day, should have overall higher bone mineral density. So if you look at kind of what is osteoporotic definition in a general population, that is different than what we kind of through American College of Sports Medicine guidelines for what low bone mineral density is in our mind. And so we use less than -1 as our cutoff. And so 30% of males had bone mineral density Z-scores less than -1. However, in females, only 16.7%, so almost 17% had scores less than -1. And so for me, it's like, what is going on with this male ultra running population that kind of is higher as far as higher risk based on Z-score, and just overall under kind of lower bone stress injury history. And
that's right. They're lying. I'm telling you, Emily. I've got the answer for your research right here. They're lying. If a big part of the mechanism is poor bone health, and the guys showing up to the line have markedly poorer bone health than the women, they should have more bony stress injuries coming into the race. So the fact that the research or the survey is saying the inverse is true, they're just lying flat out. I'm telling you right now, case closed. They're just lying.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe I'll give the guys the benefit, and maybe they forgot about injuries in their past. maybe they were minimized. They're like, oh yeah,
that really wasn't an injury. Yeah. That really wasn't an injury. Oh god. Sorry, dudes. I'm just calling it like it is.
But the other interesting thing is some of these genetic risk scores, and so we found that the genetics. So we looked specifically within the genetic risk profile at different SNPs, single nuclear polymorphisms. Make sure.
Yep.
Yeah. The SNPs, and we looked at SNPs that were previously correlated with bone mineral density and low bone mineral density and bone mineral density risk. And we found that the bone mineral density genetic risk score was correlated with bone mineral density in the male. So the low bone mineral density genetic risk was consistent with the bone mineral density that we found in DEXA in males. However, in females, we did not see that. And I will say that we're underpowered, so maybe there would be that finding. But for me, it kind of takes us back to that conversation at the beginning about this multifactorial nature for bone health, bone mineral density, and bone stress injury risk. And are there more hormonal influences? If you kind of had to put a percentage and a weight in a weighted pool as far as how much weight do we need to put on the hormonal risk profile versus the genetic risk versus the biomechanics versus the load, and is that different in males and females, and is that different in the ultra running population in particular? And unfortunately, my answer is we still don't know. And
but that's why you do the research. That's why you do the research when you don't know answers. And that's why it's important. I mean, I can remember, part of, once again, trying to encourage people to go do the research. It wasn't that long ago where we used a scale at an aid station to determine hydration status. In Western states in particular, they would pull you from the race or make you stay in the aid station if your body weight had dropped below, I think it was 8% of your starting body weight. And we know largely through research that was done at Western states that athletes should actually be losing weight during the course of the race. So this policy had the opposite effect it was intended to, where athletes were intentionally trying to overhydrate, which causes other problems, blah, blah, blah. But my point with that is we didn't know that before the research. Now we know it. We can reverse course on that particular policy, which was bad for athletes. Let's get that right. That was not a good policy for athletes to have. And a lot of other races had it, not to throw Western States under the bus or anything like that. But it doesn't happen unless people like yourself, Emily, actually do the work. So everybody, let's shoot for 400. How many people are in the Western States field this year? 460 something. 400. Let's shoot for 400 people that are involved in Emily's study. Let's just get everybody, especially the women, because as you mentioned, they're underrepresented in ultra running to start out with, and they're underpowered in the study that the studies that you're involved in.
Yep.
Okay. So what's next? What do you want to see kind of come down the pipeline 3 or 4 years from now in this whole area of bone health and injury prevention, like your wheelhouse? What do you ultimately kind of want to see happen in the field?
Oh, wow. Do you want to know my dream?
Yeah, totally. Because we can make it happen.
How long is this podcast? So I think, here's my dream. One is to have better translation of the science to the people that need to hear it the most.
Yes.
So I think number one, we can do all the research in the world and find all these novel, really interesting findings. But if that's not going to change the behavior of an athlete, the behavior of the coach, the parent, I work with a lot of young athletes, and change sometimes the culture. And that's like a big ask, but I think we need to oftentimes change the culture within the sport. And I think that starts with good science, both kind of the deep down kind of technical science where you're like in the lab, but also like out in the world and like what's going to motivate people, and kind of look at more behavioral changes and what's kind of into that psychological component of all this, get into the psyche. For me, I think that's like a big number one, big goal is to be able to find a good way to translate this information in a very like data heavy kind of always coming at you type of world, where it's hard to distinguish the good information from the maybe not bad information, but not the information is there, but it's not maybe presented in the right way and delivered in the right way. And it can really confuse an athlete, even a coach who's just trying to keep up and keep their head above water. And so I think kind of my call to action is we as physicians and researchers, it's part of our job is to educate, and not just even in the one-on-one. I think that's an opportunity in the one-on-one clinical setting. But as far as the big impact, I think we need to find ways to disseminate that information better.
Let's talk about a way that we have done that, because I think that this is a good bridge to the last topic I want to talk to you about. I think a really good way that we've done that recently, maybe in the past 4 or 5 years, is this transition of describing a certain phenomenon in endurance sports from the female athlete triad to Red S. Mm-hmm. We're calling it Red S in this podcast, or Reds.
I hear it both ways. I talk to like Red S researchers, and she says Reds, I say Red S, and she's not correcting me. I'm definitely not correcting her.
We're going to go with Red S.
Okay.
That's the way I said it in the audiobook for the last 4 days since that's what I've been recording. We'll go with Red S. Okay. But I think that is a brilliant illustration of, we used to describe this issue this way. We realize that there's more nuance to it, and we can describe it better in an effort to educate athletes and practitioners. Now we're going to call it this. Everybody got on board with it. This is what I thought was really phenomenal with this whole transition, is everybody was like, yes, we needed to make this transition. We're going to be on board with it. We can call it Reds or Red S. I don't care. We're just happy we made the transition. That is what is supposed to happen. When we recognize a failure of what we are doing as a community, we can all collaboratively come together and say, okay, we're going to transition to this. This is the new model. Here's our framework. Here's how we're going to discuss it. And the reason that it's important, which you just touched on, is that when we coaches, scientists, athletes, practitioners, physical therapists, people in the medical setting, orthopedic setting, when we're all operating from the same playbook, there's an intraoperability between all of those groups where we can then leverage all of our strengths. But it doesn't happen it doesn't happen to the same degree, at least, if we're not using the same vocabulary and we're not using the same playbook. That's why this transition is interesting. But let's get down to the practical pieces for the athletes, because I know you've done a lot of work in this area. First, starting out with the female athlete triad, what was that? What were the failure points? And why are we moving to this new model? And what's important for athletes in this, I'm calling it a new model, but it essentially is. What's important for athletes in this Red S model?
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I think this is a really good example of, that translation and where are we really going? Kind of what is our underlying goal? And I think the underlying goal is very similar as far as kind of the message that we're trying to get across. And to kind of get started. So the female athlete triad kind of really stems back from the 1980s. Dr. Barbara Drinkwater had some really seminal research that identified that this low energy availability has an important piece to both kind of hormonal balance and ultimately bone health. So I think we kind of need to remember that low energy availability is this cornerstone for both kind of female athlete triad and eventually Red S. So in the American College of Sports Medicine defined female athlete triad as 3 interrelated components. Low energy availability with or without an eating disorder. So it doesn't have to go to the extreme of an eating disorder, but I think there are disordered eating tendencies. And I can give you some stats even from this Western States study that over almost half of the males had disordered eating behaviors. And I think 2/3 of females around that had disordered eating behaviors. Now, that's not an eating disorder. And I think that there can be more in that healthier norm of disordered eating. That's not really what I meant to say. There can be periods of different low energy availability cycles within a training that can be done safely. But oftentimes, especially if done in isolation, it can lead to underfueling for a prolonged period of time. And so this goes to our second piece, which can lead to, in females, irregular periods or what we call menstrual dysfunction. This could be a delay in the first period. So this is an athlete, a young female athlete who maybe gets her period at 15, 16 or later. Or it can be an athlete who during heavier bouts of training loses her period or doesn't even have to lose her period. That cycle can change. It can get lighter. It can maybe change as far as kind of shorter duration. Or the bigger challenge is they may just not ovulate, but they have periods. Or they may have changes in other hormonal profiles, but still have periods, but things are starting to get off kilter. So that reproductive suppression through irregular periods can then lead to changes in bone remodeling, which is the third, which is low bone mineral density or impaired bone health. So that might be a history of stress fractures if we don't measure bone mineral density, and we don't have to in all athletes, or can actually be low bone mineral density as we defined earlier through American College of Sports Medicine as a DEXA Z-score of less than -1. So those are the 3 components. So the female athlete triad, there's a lot of research on the relationship of triad risk factors and low bone mineral density, triad risk factors, and prospective or future stress fracture. So we were able to use that triad risk tool to actually, as a predictive model, to actually predict potential risk for future stress fracture. And that could help stratify risk for a physician who's trying to communicate with an athlete, how to maybe adjust training, or in a collegiate setting, they may be restricted from actually participating in sport to some degree. So as research evolved, a similar phenomenon was seen in male athletes. And so this research group, this Female Athlete Triad Coalition, coined that term, the male athlete triad. And the main difference being instead of irregular periods, males presented with hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. You use that and say it 10 times fast.
You did that really well. I was wondering how that was gonna roll off the tongue. Kudos to you. I would have stumbled over that 100 times. What is that, by the way? Listeners have now just rolled their eyes going, I have no idea. That's too many syllables for me to keep track of.
So that is a suppression, again, a suppression of sex hormones that are more specific to a male athlete. Specifically, the most common hormone that we talk about is testosterone. The challenge with measuring testosterone is there's a wide array of normal, more air quotes over here. And the lower testosterone, we do see that in endurance athletes. And that can, again, lead to other reproductive effects and suppressed bone mineral density. So similar type of phenomena, but a little different in males. But we're still seeing in our collegiate athlete population, also part of another research study called the Healthy Runner Project. It's I think been going on for 7 or 8 years now with Stanford and UCLA. And we found that this cumulative risk assessment tool, looking at the male athlete, is also predictive of future bone stress injury risk. So there's something happening here. So in 2014, the International Olympic Committee came together and saw low energy availability as its cornerstone, and really wanted to expand this definition, or kind of take this, expand the triad to encompass more health and performance consequences. And so they coined the term relative energy deficiency in sport to really capture that. And that includes male and female athletes. So I think one misconception is that RED-S is really replacing, as far as terms, replacing the male or female athlete triad. And really the understanding is that the RED-S is an expansion of this female and male athlete triad. So if you actually look at, I know, Jason, you'll probably show this graphic or figure, the both health and performance consequences of RED-S in a really nice kind of circular figure, really clean. And part of that includes the triangle of the triad. And I think you can see that there are all these other circles as cardiovascular effects, affecting the immune system, affecting just overall kind of mood and the mental health pieces. And I think those are really important factors that can be a consequence of low energy availability that just have yet to be fully understood and studied to the degree that the triad has been studied. So I would say, we kind of think about the timeline of the female triad and then the male athlete triad. And that started in the 80s and 90s. And RED-S is really kind of getting going in 2014. And thanks to the International Olympic Committee, has really just churned out some great research. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I think between both groups, the triad research group and the RED-S research group, that they're both moving forward. I think just like any, I think this is very common in academic medicine and in research, where there are some clashes as far as ideas and theories. And I think it's just like healthy competition in all realms, that's going to hold each to a high standard. And I think one of my goals with some of this information and dissemination of information is I hope to have a platform that I can really pull in both of those concepts and kind of explain the relationship and the good research that's coming out of both of those ideas. And I think ultimately the vision is to help an athlete understand when they're maybe presenting with early signs of something like RED-S or the triad, and then be able to almost communicate that, be like, coach, I think I am dealing with some issues related to low energy availability. I need to kind of reassess and look at maybe my training, or maybe just like fueling timing, and make those adjustments earlier, and hopefully salvage the season, make both coach and athlete happier, because a running and training athlete is a happy athlete.
100%. So you mentioned you want to educate people on what some of the early signs are. What are you finding out so far? Like, what are some of these things that the athletes should watch out for, where they need to put a pause and say, okay, I need to assess this. And then we can take it to, it'd be really easy to just say, listen, you need to increase your energy intake. But functionally, what's the outcome? How should the athlete course correct if they do see any of those signs?
Yeah. I think the low hanging fruit, the one that's been studied the most is kind of an athlete or female athlete losing her period.
Right.
I mean, that's the one we talk about the most. And for me, that's kind of late in the game.
Right.
The findings show that like low energy availability can really lead to those hormonal effects that don't lead to that delay in period or that suppression. And I mean, that can happen within a week or two and really start to affect some of the bone remodeling and some of those serologic markers or those bone biomarkers. So for me, that's too late. And I think it also is challenging because a lot of athletes are on different types of hormonal replacement therapies, which is another topic that we could really get into as far as some of the challenges, one, in understand and kind of teasing out an athlete's like true kind of internal hormonal profile when they are on some type of hormonal replacement. But I think,
hold on, this shouldn't get glossed over. If athletes are in this state, you're saying full stop the train. Like that's too late. You need to completely reassess what's going on because it is such a lagging indicator, or it lags so long. Okay. I want everybody to pay attention to that because that's super important. Let's try to back up though. If there are leading indicators, what could they be, or what are some of the earlier, at least don't lag as much, some of the earlier indicators that issues might start come about because of Red S?
Yeah, I think this is where it gets gray, just like full disclosure, because we are still trying to understand what. I think it's hard because there's a lot of overlap. And one, the chronic fatigue, I think I see that an athlete maybe is underperforming or consistently underperforming. And that can also be a part of a training cycle too. So it's like, how do you know when, and I think it overlaps with kind of overtraining syndrome, which is really hard. And it's a diagnosis of exclusion is, are they overreaching or are they in this early Red S phase? And I mean, the true question, Jason, is what's the difference?
Right.
Like, is that early Red S, if addressed really quickly, kind of part of sometimes that training cycle? And I think what an athlete needs to understand is kind of consistent, kind of underperforming as far as just and feel and poor sleep and irritability and all these other factors that can be from a number of different reasons, but can also be from just consistently that low energy availability piece. Sometimes there's kind of obvious kind of looking back at their training, if there is an acute change and or acute increase. Like sometimes I see it in those transitions when an athlete goes from middle school to high school to college to kind of out in on their own, maybe adjusting or kind of going to that next race distance, they start to fall into a low energy availability state. You can start to look if there are some changes in just overall kind of cardiovascular profile. So this is something that I'm really interested in to see if, will heart rate variability be a potential future indicator of that low energy availability state? I think it's hard, again, to tease out whether that like overtrained and kind of maybe too much strain is also at play.
I want everybody to listen to Emily's vocabulary. Will it be, not is it currently? Because if you survey the landscape right now, you can definitely get the impression that ship has left the dock, that we've already determined that heart rate variability can give us these indicators on X, Y, or Z, and it is very much not the case.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're still we got to be honest and humble with where we are in the science and the interpretation of the science. And I think it's really easy, especially when there's something fancy and like something new out there that could be a quick fix and a quick answer and has the right algorithm, could be interpreted that way. And I will say that like something like heart rate variability could be a very useful, but I also can see it being very distracting.
Yeah.
And I think it's all about thinking about all these other factors. So I know I'm not giving you a very clean answer as far as some of those early signs. And I think it's because we really don't know enough to be able to share with an athlete some of those early signs without maybe getting some of those blood markers, for example, some of the thyroid function, like free T4, total T3. So you can start to see those getting suppressed earlier on. But I think expecting an athlete or like understanding how to interpret those lab results is really, really challenging, kind of in a practical setting.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues I've always had with a lot of the blood biomarker companies that are out there, the direct-to-consumer ones, is that you either have to be doing the testing on such a frequent basis and then creating an individual profile for the people. And the frequent listeners of this podcast will remember the podcast I did with Sean Arnett. We talked about this a lot. The frequency has to be such almost on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. It has to be so consistent that you can build an individual profile for an athlete in order to use some of those biomarkers as some of the initial indicators of whatever you're looking at: low energy availability, overtraining, over fatigue, kind of whatever it is. If you're not taking those blood samples that frequently, you get a lot of false positives and false negatives, and you almost are looking at a disease state at that point, and then course correcting for a disease state versus an optimization state. So that's another 10 podcasts that you just gave me, Emily. Thank you for that.
Anytime.
But I think the drive home point for the listeners is that energy availability or lack thereof is at the center of all of these cascades, of all of this cascade of negative consequences. The negative consequences, we're starting to flush out how much like cause and effect there actually is, and it's different for different people. But energy availability is at the center of it. How do you get there? Well, the simple answer, or how do you not get there? The simple answer is make sure that you're not in an energy depleted state. That is way easier said than actually done, particularly with the training loads that ultramarathoners have to regularly encounter throughout their training. A simple way, though, is not to deploy any strategies that intentionally do that, right? And we see this a lot, particularly in the ultramarathon and Ironman triathletes see this as well, where there's been this recent rash of athletes and coaches that are trying to intentionally leverage low energy states to produce a metabolic adaptation. They want enhanced fat oxidation and things like that. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that always comes at a cost. And many times that cost far outweighs the very small benefit that you could get. And you could even argue that there's no benefit at all.
No, I think is such a good point. And I really enjoyed your podcast interview with Craig Sale. Shout out to what Craig is doing and Kirsty's doing out there on just better understanding those fluctuations in fueling. Trent Stellingwerf is also another big researcher in that world. And I was just reading some of the research specifically in that ultra endurance population and like fueling and fueling strategies. And I think there's always this dream that we're going to try to like kind of cheat the system and figure out how to like find that sweet ratio. I mean, do we really need carbs? Oh, maybe not. And then ultimately, I loved some of this research Louise Burke just put out that really kind of refuted and not all, but just was like, hey, like pump the brakes here. Carbs are really important for multiple different reasons, especially in an ultra endurance world. And so I think that you highlight a really important point that fuel, there are certain kind of specifics that we need to think about as far as the type of fuel that's putting into our body. But I think everyone can agree that fueling is incredibly important. And the timing of that, especially in an ultra marathon runner, you need to have that dialed. You need to practice. You need to find ways. Like if you struggle to get fuel in your body at like 3 hours, 4 hours into a race, then you need to practice that and figure out how to get that fuel in your body, because ultimately that's going to affect your performance. It's going to like wreak havoc on just multiple different systems, including bone health, that we're understanding all the other effects that may have that we don't fully understand, especially in the ultra endurance population. And I think another piece is the whole idea of supplementation and thinking that you can just supplement with all of these different micronutrients and kind of that's just going to be this panacea that allows you to be resilient and unbreakable. But I think that there is a time and a place, and I prescribe supplements quite a bit, especially if an athlete who has an injury, to just make sure everything is optimized. But really thinking about ways to get that from the diet, and if it's consistently low, kind of asking the big why. That some of the other factors that could be at play too, because long-term micronutrient deficiencies are going to be a problem and could lead to an injury, or could also lead to other kind of health effects as far as kind of prolonged fatigue and other factors.
100%. Take-home messages is eat your Wheaties, people.
Eat your Wheaties.
Eat your Wheaties. Emily, we're going to let you go. I promise I'm going to put the links to everything in the show notes. So if you're at all interested in Emily's research or any of the research that's coming up out at Western States, go ahead and view the show notes. Also have links to your social media accounts. You're a good Instagram follow, by the way. Go follow Emily on Instagram. She puts out really great content. It's informative for me as a coach. It helps me keep track of what's going on just by following people like you, Emily. What else? How else can athletes interact with you or interact with the research that you're involved with?
Yeah. So I've got the Twitter and the Instagram to kind of try and push information. I will say
What's the handle? What's the handle?
So Emily Kraus MD is the Twitter handle. Kraus is my how do you spell my last name? And then I have 2 Instagram accounts, which if I needed anything else to do, adding another Instagram account, let's just throw it on the list. So there's Emily Kraus MD, which is a little more social, more kind of family and fun. And then I try and do it Emily Kraus MD _ sport science, where I try to push, and then I'm trying to be better about pushing some good information to kind of the followers and what I'm interested in and some of the research that I'm doing. So those are kind of the social media. And then I do have a website that if you are interested in trying to get in touch with me, both for with clinical questions, there are ways often to do kind of telehealth visits out of state. It gets a little bit more challenging, but I'll kind of do my best to help an athlete in whatever way I can. And that's emilykrausmd.com.
Just Google Emily Kraus. You'll find it out.
Yeah.
Emily, on behalf of the listeners and for me personally, thank you for what you do. You've helped me as a professional throughout the course of your career, whether you realize it or not, but also you've individually helped a lot of my athletes with various issues as they've gone through their running career. So I owe you a debt of gratitude for that. You will continue, since we all suck at preventing injuries, we've already been through that. That's going to continue. So I appreciate the fact that we have individuals like yourself that we can continually lean on.
Thank you, Jason, for this opportunity. Thanks for having this podcast to kind of give a lot of these researchers and clinicians and scientists a voice to be able to kind of get to your listeners, because that's why we're here, and it's super rewarding. So thanks for the opportunity.
100%.
All right, runners, there you have it. There you go. Much thanks to Emily for coming on the podcast today. We will have to bring her back on when we have a little bit more information as to what actually turned out from all these studies that we are doing at Western States. I cannot emphasize enough, if you have the opportunity to participate in research, please go do so. It helps our understanding of the sport, or injuries in this case, or bone health in this case, a tremendous amount. And none of that is possible if we don't get people to volunteer for the studies. So go out there, volunteer for the studies. You will thank yourself later, and I thank you in advance. I also thank everybody for listening to this podcast. If you have not had the opportunity, go on over to Apple Podcasts and give this podcast a rating or a review. It means a lot to me and helps out the podcast a tremendous amount. All right, that's it for today, folks. And as always, we will see you out on the trails.